Good evening, everybody. My name is Fergal O'Keefe. You're very welcome to the Unspeakable Bits webinar. As usual, our host tonight is Travis Gleeson, and we've got some great guests tonight. He's joined by Ruth Sheeran, who's qualified counsellor, psychotherapist. We have Terry Sue Cosgrove from the HR head, who is the HR and employment law specialist. We've got Shirley Keane O'Brien, who's our MS Readathon ambassador this year. And we also have Orla Mannion. So I'll pass you, and actually just before I pass you over to Travis, I just want you to, if anybody has questions, please could you submit those questions through the Q&A tab. Don't send them through the chat tab, and I'll be able to pass them on to Travis then. So take care.
All right. Hello and welcome to this, our next edition of the Unspeakable Bits. I'm Travis L. Gleeson, your host, as Fergal said. We'd like to thank MS Ireland for their support and for giving us a platform to delve into topics once and well, often still considered taboo, but are a real and important part of getting over, under, around, and through the challenges of a life living with multiple sclerosis. As mentioned, please use the questions tab on your screen if you'd like to ask something of our panel, and we'll get to as many of those over the course of the next 50 minutes or so as we possibly can. And whether it's being newly diagnosed or breaking the news to your family, telling a new romantic interest somewhere down the line, sharing it with your children for the very first time, informing your employer, or opening up to a friend, disclosing multiple sclerosis isn't just a one-time thing. In fact, I just had a conversation about MS and then my MS with a baker today in our town who didn't know about my disease. And perhaps that's not disclosure, but well, I suppose sort of. So we'll talk about all of that. And some people come out about their MS in big, bold fundraising announcements and treks up Everest. And others keep their stories only for those closest to them and on a need-to-know basis. Even some don't tell those closest to them, I suppose. So no matter how you are most comfortable with handling such things, that's probably the right way for you. There are, however, always lessons to be learned and tips to be collected along the path of a life with multiple sclerosis. And I'm often want to say that a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from other people's mistakes. And I suppose the same can be said for experiences as well. As Fergal mentioned, it's a great panel of guests we have for this program, and I'd much rather listen to them than to my own voice. So let's just jump right in. Both Shirley and Orla are people living with this disease, multiple sclerosis. But I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to ask each of you to take a couple of minutes and tell us about yourselves without talking about this disease that we share. All right. So give us your little bio, who you are, not talking about MS. We'll start with Orla.
Hi everyone. The type of person I am. So the type of person I would be a go-getter. I'd be an overthinker, a super organized freak, a plan for a plan kind of a person. My mom describes me as a person, a dog with a bone. So once I have something in my head, I'm there. I'm all in and I'm go. Yeah, that's sort of me. It always has been throughout my whole life. I've always been that kind, and still that kind of person that I plan everything, overthink everything, and put my whole self into everything. I don't do anything I won't take on it, and if I only can do it 50% or 60%, I'll only take on something if I can do it like 100% or possibly 120%. That's the only way I'll take something on.
Orla, single, married, children, no children, pets?
I am married and I have 2 kids, 8 and 10.
Very good.
So I am 36 years old. And yes, happily married, 2 kids, and yeah, no, that's me.
That's you. Perfect. I love it. And Shirley, you're one of those people. Maybe I'm talking about disclosing by great big fundraising by being the
yes,
the ambassador. But
well, this year anyway, yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Shirley. I'm 45. I am I'm separated, married but separated. I have two teenage kids, Evan and Lauren. They're 15 and 17. I work as a buyer, a senior buyer for a chemical company, pharmaceutical. I buy chemicals for a pharmaceutical company. I work remotely. Yeah, similar to Orla, kind of have a busy mind, have really had to work on taming it a little bit, and sort of just, quite my mind a little bit, and plan better. And I like to finish things, and I like to achieve what I set out to achieve. And um, yeah, I suppose wellness is something that I've sort of been dabbling in a little bit recently. I kind of, I thought my job is quite demanding. And, I suppose as I'm mid 40s now, I'm thinking maybe as I head into retirement years, maybe there's something a little bit more enjoyable than the demanding buying sort of chemical, pharmaceutical, position I'm in. Um, Personally, me, I love musicals. I was always a performer, a lead dancer in a local musical society. Um, I like to exercise. I like to keep fit and, go to the gym and do that kind of stuff. Um, Kind of taking up more of yoga and try to tame the exercise a little bit more now that again, I'm in the mid 40s, and it's not as, it's not as full on. And yeah, I think that's me. I just like a simple life, enjoy a glass of wine every now and again, and a nice meal. And I'm vegan. I went down the vegan route. I'm trying it anyway. I'd probably only claim to be 90% because sometimes it's very difficult to be vegan. But I try it, and I would say maybe 10% of the time probably vegetarian. But yeah, that's pretty much me.
Great. I thank you for that, Shirley, and Orla as well. And I wanted, as I said, to do that exercise because I think it's important for everyone to realize that that there is a lot more to talk about. And we are all a fair good bit more than just MS. But now let's shift to talking about MS. And Shirley, we'll stick with you now.
Okay.
Thinking back now, first off, how long have you been diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, my journey began probably 2018. My diagnosis probably was coming for a while, but there were some, you know, uh, uncertainty with it. But I got my final diagnosis in 2019. So that's what, 4 years.
Okay. So do you remember the first person you told that you had MS?
The very first person, I suppose, was my husband was with me at the time, my ex-husband was with me. Um, so I suppose he was the first person outside of myself that would have learned about it. And then I took some time. I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I think I was shocked, and I felt some shame, and I was confused, and I really didn't know what to expect or what was happening. Um, and then COVID hit. We all went into lockdown, and I think I found myself happy to isolate. It wasn't necessarily right or good mentally, but it's what happened. And I was quite happy to do that. And then I guess that wasn't, I was struggling a little bit with that mentally. And then I think 2021, that was about 12 months. I just stayed isolating at home, hiding behind COVID. And then I decided obviously that, I needed to, I was a crutch user at that stage. I was a crutch user probably at the time I got diagnosed. And initially it started out with a knee problem, or what I thought was a knee problem. And then we learned about a neurological deficit, and that's really what was leading towards a diagnosis. So my kids obviously saw me struggle with my knee in the crutch, and obviously a heavy leg and all that kind of stuff was going on. So they needed to be the first people that I told. And what I did was we kind of talked about me getting an operation on my knee. Maybe that was the solution when COVID passed and stuff like this. And, that kind of excuse was kind of, wasn't really an option anymore. And it was time to disclose what was really going on with them. So I put a lot of thought into that because I wanted to be emotionally strong to do that. It was important for me that I was able to, deliver that information, personally strong, and give them that reassurance that I had taken control. I felt I had taken control, and it can be quite scary because I know two teenagers are going to go straight on the internet. They're going to go to Google. They're going to, Google multiple sclerosis, and it's a snowflake illness. Everybody has a different experience. So what I did,
your children, and it was about a year or so after diagnosis.
After my diagnosis.
Okay.
So what I did is I made them a booklet. I actually made them, I think I had a copy of it here, but I made them a colorful booklet, and I titled it MS My Story. And put all the information about what it was about, the kind of obvious questions I thought teenagers would ask me. Will you die? Is it, how sick will you be? Those kind of things. And I knew that would be the first question that particularly my teenage son was going to ask me. And that was the first question he asked, like, oh my goodness, are you going to die? And so I kind of addressed all those important questions in the booklet. I kind of made it colorful and fun, and I tried to. I mean, they probably cringe at it, but this is what I came up with. And I told them, when we talked through it, and I gave them the booklets, and they were able to go and read those. Later on, if they've had any questions or concerns, I'd ask them maybe not to go on the internet, because the internet, may not relate to my experience with MS, and sort of the plan that I had to try and take back control, or take some control, and move forward, with physio and exercise and diet and things like that. So that's how I told them. And, it was really positive.
All right. And Orla, how long ago were you diagnosed, and who was the first person that you told? Maybe not was in the room.
I was diagnosed 6 years ago, so a month after my 30th birthday, a day after we moved into our dream house, and a day after we had our housewarming with everybody over. So yeah, my husband, like that, but like yourself, my husband was with me in the appointment, but my mum knew that my doctor had rang and said my results were in, so I had rang her on the way. She goes, tell me straight away. So I left and went straight to my parents' house, and my mum met me at the door, and she goes, what is it? What are we dealing with? And I said, it's MS now. And what I want to tell you is my mum has MS as well. So her exact words, and I can still see her saying it, is, oh, thank God. And I said, what? And she goes, we know what we're dealing with. We know what we're dealing with. It's going to be okay. And
so you sort of knew what you were dealing with then as well, a bit.
Yeah, but I still don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I've grown up with it. And I've always been a volunteer for the MS Monaghan branch. So I've seen good things, but I've also seen very extreme sides of it. So it was all overwhelming. Going, which one am I going to be? Where am I going to fit in this? Am I going to go down the line of my mum, or am I going to be? So it was all just a whirlwind. But my mum was like, Orla, we know what we're dealing with. She goes, I thought you, like with some of the symptoms I had facial neuralgia and awful pains in my face and that. And she was like, I thought you had brain cancer. I thought something like this. She goes, Emma, we can deal with this. So
it sort of reminds me that when I was diagnosed, the radiologist that I sort of pinned down in a room, who wasn't supposed to tell me, said, well, it's either non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or it's MS. And I found myself rooting for, please be MS, please be MS. But I get that. Now, as I said in the introduction, it's not just at the time of diagnosis, or in the case with Shirley, a year later, that we decide to tell people. And maybe you can think of the most recent person that you've told, because as I said, happened to have a conversation today. It wasn't planned, but somebody didn't know about my disease, etc. So we'll start this time with you, Orla. Who can you remember the last time that you told someone who didn't know that you had MS?
Yeah, so I would be quite open about it. It's just the line that I have gone down. Like I said, I am a volunteer for our local branch, and we actually had an event there a week ago, and everybody in the county was invited, and we had over 100 people at it, and I was one of the hosts for the day doing a raffle. But a lady came up to me at the end, just talking to me generally. She's newly diagnosed, and she was just talking about herself, and I said, oh, I totally understand. I was like, I went through that at the beginning too. And she's there, you look okay, do you have MS? And I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I do. I was there, I have my makeup on and my hair done, and I'm all beans and all go today. I was there, but yeah, no, I do. And I think that's one of the hard things, is because luckily I don't have a walking in, and I don't have anything like that. A majority of my symptoms are invisible. I deal with a lot of symptoms every day, but to the naked eye, nobody else can see it. Unless you knew me, you would know that I have MS, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But it's still not, it doesn't get me annoyed. People can just say, oh, but you're grand, sure, look at you, you're fine.
Yeah.
And that can be hard, I feel, to deal with. It still doesn't stop me telling people, and still doesn't stop me talking about it. And I have talked to people throughout this year in Monaghan who've recently diagnosed, because I did find when I was diagnosed, I liked talking to people around my same age, going through sort of the same things that I was going through. I talked to a few people, and it helped me. So I feel now it's my turn, that if I can talk to some people, I've talked to 3 people this year locally who've been recently diagnosed, sort of in the same sort of age bracket as me, going through, and they said that they loved the conversation, and they'd ring me and we'd have a chat. And if I can help anybody or just be a soundbar for anybody, I'm quite happy to do that.
I've often said it's the best club that no one ever wants to join. Sheila, Shirley, I'm sorry, can you remember the most recent time that you've disclosed?
Yes, it was quite recently. So I'm separated a few years, and recently I went for a date, met somebody, and I had the crutch. My leg was strapped, sort of conversation as to what I had done to myself with the crutch. And I didn't, I was having coffee with the friends and got in a conversation. So of course I didn't mention that I had MS at that stage, but I did mention that it could be a crutch for life, or, the crutch was going to be around for a while. And then I was asked out on a date, and on the date I disclosed it. I decided that it wasn't going to be something I hide. It's me. It's part of me. And if it's not for somebody in a new relationship, then nothing lost, nothing gained, or nothing gained, nothing lost. So I was quite open and honest about it. And on the first date, I said I had MS, and yeah, it was a great experience. And we've been dating since, and that's Ronan, and he's been great support to me. Even small little things. I'm trying to. My balance is really bad, as you might be familiar with. But even little things from, I needed to get a new car. I need to change my car so I can get the scooter hoist in there, and I need to park at a different spot in the driveway. So we're trying to figure out, how do I maneuver with my balance, get some railings up and stuff, instead of me grabbing the post box and grabbing the door and stuff like that. It's just been great. He's been a great support. I didn't know a whole lot about MS, but I've asked all the questions. I've answered all the questions. And it was, I'm so happy that I did disclose that immediately. And that was just maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. And yeah, it hasn't been an issue so far.
Very good. Very good. Now, I suppose that disclosing has a twin sibling, and that would be secrecy. Not everyone needs to know everything about us all the time. And even if we do eventually tell them, they may need to know for now. And I suppose this can be a bit stressful. Like Shirley was saying, she decided that it wasn't going to be something that she was hiding, and it's not that we're hiding it necessarily, but it can be stressful for someone because we kind of feel like we're living a bit of a lie. So Ruth, you're a professional in this area. Is it natural to feel, anxious or guilty or ashamed if we decide not to tell someone?
I think so. I think it's a very individual choice, obviously, for each person, and they'll all have varied reasons for the reasons, to either keep something or to disclose something. So secrecy, I suppose it comes along with common type emotional strains, if you want, to disclosure. You would think that they would, even though they're quite opposite, but both can bring on stress, both can bring on anxiety, the idea of actually disclosure or secrecy, and often confidence issues surrounding the actual way in which you're going to either diagnose or hold on to the information. So yeah, it's secrecy is, for everyone's own reason. People might not be able to bring, that's what I would often meet, people not being able to yet bring it across. And I think when we listen to Orla and Shirley's stories there is an amount of processing that both of these ladies have actually done, and acceptance. But often when that processing and acceptance isn't there, I have met clients that would find it really difficult to emotionally regulate and to be able to tell somebody without breaking down. I have somebody actually come to mind, and they were asked, were they in a car accident? And they said yes, just off the bat, because they knew if they answered no and went into the MS diagnosis, that could have wreaked up a huge emotional response, and they just did not want to do that out in public or to this particular neighbour. So yeah, secrecy or disclosure both carry, emotional strains.
Yeah.
And Orla mentioned in a good way, but many of us can relate to the stories that I've heard from people, and we've all heard who've been questioned about their truthfulness about their disease, told that they're lazy or that it's somehow our fault. Is there a way, Ruth, that we can prepare ourselves for those possible retorts, and how best do we handle the aftermath of a less than kind response when we do tell someone?
Again, very individual. And I suppose that depends on lots of things, like your coping appraisals, your coping strategies and skills, and that develops with time with the diagnosis. So obviously time is a healer in that regard. But I think, yeah, a lot of people, especially those, like Orla mentioned, those hidden symptoms that aren't visible, other people just, I suppose it's not their realm, so maybe they just can't imagine or can't understand. You look so fine, Orla and Shirley, both beautiful women. You look so beautiful. It's the whole idea of disability as well, and the concepts that surround disability and people's what could you say? People's perception of what disability is. So it is a very, very varied what would you say, response. I have heard clients come in and be told, like, oh my gosh, horrible, like from their own family members as well. And it is devastating. And you really see these people are suffering. They feel a lack of trust toward people because they're not being accepted. They feel also at times that they can't voice how they're feeling because people don't believe me. They also can feel that, they're not being listened to, and somebody not validating our story, especially people who are close, near and dear to us, that can be a big issue, especially with the acceptance piece.
Yeah, it's a tough part, and like I said, it's not something that's just at newly diagnosed time. We're rolling through that all the time. We're gonna move on a bit, but please don't hesitate to send in those questions. We do have one from Deborah, who's looking for a psychotherapist, maybe who has an expertise in MS clients, in the Cork area. And Deborah, I know that if you get in touch with your community worker there in Cork, with MS Ireland, they'll be able to help you. But Ruth, would there be a database online that people can go to, and would it list that someone has experience with MS?
Not necessarily. I think realistically, the best way would be contacting the local MS worker, and because people, obviously, counsellors, psychotherapists don't just work with one field. They may have a passion in working with something. So, it best touch base, and a word of mouth is always best as well.
Okay, very good. I suppose one of the most difficult and certainly an important decision is if, when, and how to tell one's employer. And I'm going to ask Fergal, our producer, if he'll put up some links that I found while I was researching tonight's topic. There's loads from the European MS platform, from MS Ireland itself, from the National MS Society. So do take a look at that, and I hope you find them useful. Terry Sue is a professional in human resources. I'm sure that you've heard the horror stories about this sort of thing when it goes pear-shaped. So let's start with the basics. Do we have to tell our employer?
No, you actually don't have to tell your employer. If you choose not to tell your employer, that is your right. However, if you don't tell your employer, then you won't be afforded the protections that are under the Employment Equality Act, and disability falls underneath that. So there's very few rights where you would have to, or few areas that you would actually have to tell your employer that would come under health and safety. If there was a health and safety concern with your illness or disability in the workplace, then you may be forced to disclose. However, if you choose to, and you choose not to, and you can continue on and fulfill the needs of your job fully, then you don't have to. However, if you do need reasonable accommodations, then it would be best advised to disclose your illness to your employer. And you can ask for that to be in confidence. You can reach out to your employer and say, I've got this diagnosis. This is what I may need. And then they have actually, underneath that disability, underneath the act, they have to make reasonable accommodations for you in the workplace with your needs.
Yeah, and we'll get to those reasonable accommodations. But when you say tell your employer, I suppose this all depends on the size of the firm that you're working for, as to who you might be able to tell. So if your organization is large enough that it has a human resources department, it's HR that you would go to. It wouldn't necessarily be your line manager. Is that correct? Or would your line manager be the person you tell?
Well, it's up to you. And in your workplace, do you feel safe to disclose that to your line manager? Have you a good relationship with your line manager? Or would you like in the first instance to go to the HR? So that again would be up to the individual themselves.
All right. And so let's talk about prospective employers. We're in that third interview, maybe, where we were expecting the offer and the big paycheck. Are we supposed to tell them?
Well, again, that'll be up to you. You do not have to. So if you need reasonable accommodations and you want to be very open and transparent about the needs that you will have going into a job, you can disclose it. But if you choose not to, and then you're hired into the job, and you need accommodations made for you in the job, well, then that employer still has, under legislation, has to make those reasonable accommodations for you. So it's up to yourself whether you feel that it's serving you to do so. So we know that there is a code of practice for the public services in Ireland, that they have to have a 3% of their employees have to meet the disability or have a disability. So the government is encouraging for those measures to be made. So every year, I know I was the head of HR in a hospital, we had to fill into a database how many of our employees had a disability, and we had to make these measures. So we were being forced or encouraged to go out to the market and to make sure that we were, it was an open and fair employment jobs for everybody, that we were accommodating to everybody with every type of disability.
Well, that's a tough one. There's a bit of an affirmative action there, but you might know if that's an organization that's looking for that. It's oof.
Yeah, so we opened roles specifically for people with disabilities, and then we were able to put in like measurements for that, like, so that would have been like reduced hours, additional training, and different things, like maybe employment on the ground floor or roles on the ground floor, so they didn't have to go up elevators or lifts or anything like that. So yeah, so they are those measures that are being put in place.
So let's go to a newly diagnosed person, not showing any outward symptoms, maybe in, newly diagnosed early on in total remission, and they're in a good place. Would you consider it wise to hold off disclosing at work, and why or why not?
Would I consider it wise? I suppose it depends on your role. So I've seen in the workplace myself where you've seen a lot of sick leave from an individual. So maybe they have a flare up of something, or something has gone on with them, and there's just this recurrent sick leave. And then what actually it happens to the employees, that the managers, like, doing a return to work form. Why were you sick? Okay, you've had 40 days sick this year. And at that stage, then you're going to be put out to an occupational health provider, usually within an organization that has really good, robust policies and procedures. And again, then it's up to you to disclose. But from them, I would advise always to disclose, because therefore the minute you disclose, you're protected underneath the Act, and therefore your employer has to make the accommodations for you. So you might be able to say, down the line in the future, I may have a flare up, I may need some time out. So at that stage, then they can put in the necessary needs for the employee, so that maybe they can job share, they can reduce their hours, so whatever the employee may need, reasonable accommodations, that they can put them in place for them. So I would be open with it. I think society's really, really changing. We're much more embracive and open. So yeah, I would recommend to always disclose a disability.
All right, we're getting a comment in from Stephen, who's a person with MS, talking about some tax reliefs if you can persuade your employer, etc. So there are a lot of schemes out there that are there to help the employer, to help the employee stay employed, etc. Now, you used the word reasonable accommodation. That modifier comes in a lot. So what is reasonable, I suppose, and what is unreasonable to ask of an employer?
Okay, so when we go down to like the WRC, when these complaints come in and we have seen before the courts, reasonable is what would a reasonable employer have done? So let's say you are for an example, an accountant in firm A, and they don't put in reasonable accommodations, but firm B would have. So a reasonable accommodation would be, could you reduce your hours, giving you time off for appointments as you would need them, flexi time, everything. Maybe you need a desk with a stand-up desk, you need a different type of chair, whatever it may be, that would be a reasonable accommodation. And another reasonable, right down to if you need a ramp to enter into work, that they would apply for, if the government funding or funding for that ramp, that they would place in all the measurements that you would need to be able to deliver in your role, like on both accounts. Yeah.
Now, would the size of the business matter? I mean, if this is a mom and pop shop kind of thing, are they required to do different things or not required to do some things?
It doesn't matter on the size of the business. They're reasonably expected to put in those fair procedures for the employee. And so, reasonable again, is it an undue burden on the employer? So basically, for example, if it's a very difficult one, they are only able to have maybe one employee doing this role, could they split your role? Could they train someone else up to job share with you so that you can stay within your employment? Yes, so the obligation is on every employer, no matter how big or small they are. It's the law.
We've got an anonymous question coming in saying that they started a job, we'll say 8 weeks ago, to keep this anonymous. And about 4 weeks ago, they were diagnosed with MS. They're in a probationary period right now. Okay. And sick days are not paid under the probationary period. If they were to disclose now, would those sick days be paid?
So they should be paid 3 days, no matter, even if you're in your probation period or not. You're entitled to legally be paid 3 days sick leave this year, as long as you put in a sick cert for it. And I would absolutely disclose your disability, because then you automatically fall underneath the protection of the Act.
All right, well, then I'm going to go worst case scenario here and say that she's under probationary period, or he is, it's anonymous. and then the end of the probationary period comes and they say, all right, this didn't work out for us.
Well,
Is that at this point, this person has disclosed,
okay.
is being released at the end of the probationary period because it didn't work out, possibly discriminatory?
Well, that would depend on why they're being released. Why hasn't it worked out? Why was there sick leave? Like if they had a lot of sick leave during the probation period, like, if your search is coming in and saying the sick leave was due to your disability, well then, the employer should take reasonable accommodations and maybe even extend your probation period. Let's say it was 6 months, they might extend it for another 3 months. So I would be very wary about letting an employee go that has disclosed an illness, because you would have to prove that you've put in all measurements for that employee, because that employee could be having just a flare up, and then the flare up might go away and they might be fine for a couple of months again, or whatever it is, but you would have to be put in reasonable accommodation for the employee. So it depends, very depends. Like if the employee is not able to fulfill the role itself, that's a very different matter.
Okay, well, we'll jump away from the probationary now. We've got another comment coming in that this person's been working in a job for 16 years that has them out in the field working with elderly care, but their MS is starting to advance and that is being difficult now. So her current job is looking sort of bleak. Is there accommodation that could be made? I mean, there aren't a lot of desk jobs doing what she does.
Okay, so yeah, so that would be another reasonable accommodation, that they put them into a desk role. But could that person go part-time? Could she job share in that role? So the employer would have to, basically what I would recommend is that the employer would take an occupational health review, put all the information in, the employee meets as well with the occupational physician, and they make reasonable accommodate, or they make like suggestions about what would the employee need and how the employer could make those reasonable accommodations. So could they reduce their hours? Could they do job share? Could they condense their work to 2 days per week? Whatever that would help the employee to fulfill the role and stay in employment.
A lot of us have work friends that we work with, etc. Back to you on this one, Ruth. How would we handle it if we've told a work colleague, friend about our diagnosis, and then they tell others when we've asked them to keep our disclosure to themselves, to keep our confidence, and maybe then our employer finds out about it? And I'll go back to you, Terry Sue, about that. But just how do we handle friends that, all of a sudden something secret ends up on WhatsApp?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and it does occur often. And I think that it is that telling friends in the workplace is something that we should be quite careful of, because gossip is always sold and gossip will always sell. And I have met many people that have told me that they have shared this with a colleague and that it has gone around, and then they have obviously, felt quite hurt. So it is something that does happen, Travis. And I suppose from a client's perspective that comes in to tell me this, the question is, were they really a friend in the first place? And it's a very unfortunate, and to highlight that to somebody is kind of horrible in itself, but it does happen, and it is sad that it does happen.
Terry Sue, I'm seeing a comment saying, I'm a teacher, I've disclosed nothing, I'm very tired, but I'm worried about my privacy in terms of other staff being told, on the QT, if I tell my principal, if this person hasn't told anyone and then other people start to find out, is there any retribution? How do you handle that from your employer if your employer starts telling people?
Well, you would ask, I think that you would first approach your employer and say, or your principal, and say, I want to have like a private conversation with you. I'm telling you this in utmost privacy. It's a protected conversation. I do not want it shared with anybody on the staff. So you would put that first and foremost before you even start your conversation. And then you could detail your illness to your employer. And then I think you're saying to your principal or your employer is that, well, what is it that you need, or what would help you right now? So you're having an open conversation saying, I'm feeling very, very tired at the moment. So they'll be more understanding towards you with your illness. And so then you bring to them what it is that can help you, or what accommodations, reasonable accommodations that you would like to request. And so you will put that in, or you would maybe work with an occupational health provider to bring in the reasonableness of what you need in the workplace. Okay. So you're asking for that. If they disclose it, well, no principal should. I mean, that is, you're just saying something in the utmost of confidence. They shouldn't really do it.
Right, but then the what if?
The what if? I mean,
is there any recourse that a person has?
Well, I don't know. Are you going to
Well, if you don't know, Terry Sue.
I mean, you could make a complaint. Like, you could hire up the complaint that they've disclosed this. And I've never come across that. I'm going to be honest about that. Like, from a HR point of view, I have had people come to me in HR, in my role, saying I have this illness, and I actually do not want to tell my manager, and I've had to make different and it did come to where there was a disciplinary in the workplace, and then I had to go back to the employee and I'd say, I really need you to disclose this with your manager so that we can put in these measures for you, so we can extend your probation period.
So if we feel like we're not being treated correctly on the job because of our disease and or our disability, what should we do? And what if we don't get resolution that we're looking for in the workplace? What's the next step?
Okay, so I would always recommend that you exhaust every avenue within the workplace, so that you would, first of all, if you've met with your managers or your employer and you're not getting any accommodations, well, then you would put it into writing with them and ask them for a meeting. Bring your paperwork to them and say, these are the accommodations, share with them what it is, educate them, ask them to go away and to be educated. You could even ask your employer, can I meet with an occupational health physician, so that they can advise you and guide you as the employer, what reasonable accommodations you can put in for me. However, if you still meet dead ends, you can actually put a complaint into the WRC. So that's the Workplace Relations Commissioner, and you can put your complaint in underneath the Equality Act, the Employment Equality Act, and you can bring it before adjudicator. So, I mean, it depends on how bad you can stay in your employment and actually bring your employer down to the WRC underneath the Act. And we've seen that before. We've seen it in public bodies as well, where the employee has brought their employers to the WRC for not making reasonable accommodations. And we've seen the adjudicators in the WRC making monetary awards to the employer for the hardship and the financial hardship that they have suffered, and then made recommendations that the employer must make those reasonable accommodations for the employer. So we saw one recently, about 3 years ago, where an employee immediate access to a bathroom in the workplace, and the employer the government body didn't provide that for them in the Midlands, and they took their employer to the court, and they won, and they were reinstated in the office that they needed to be reinstated. And so there's different acts that you can take your employer. Like, there's two you could take, like if you were constructively dismissed as well, so under the Unfair Dismissals Act, and you can be awarded up to 2 years salary. But under the Employment Equality Act, underneath that act, you can get awarded much more money. But I mean, that's where you don't want to find yourself down there, because that is very, very stressful.
And we've got a few questions in here, and rather than going to the specifics, I think both of those questions that we're looking at were answered there. And I thank you for that. Ruth, telling, not telling, who to tell, when to tell, it's a lot to think about, and it can often lead us to feeling like we're reliving those first days after a diagnosis, and relapses can make us feel like we're starting back at stage one of the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. Relapses we can't control, but how can we maybe prepare ourselves for feeling those old bad feelings again when we're getting ready to tell someone new?
Well, I think having an awareness, so going to therapy is a fantastic way of preparing yourself, if you want, for processing accepting, acknowledging your needs, and establishing a kind of a self-compassion within yourself, which is really, really important for anybody living with a long-term illness. And as you say there, the grief is a massive part of early diagnosis quite often, but then a new and arising kind of a relapse. And I think, again, it's surrounding yourself with strategies and skills that can increase your ability to be able to cope with these situations. And those strategies and skills are always going to be, with something like MS, they're always going to be very different, because as we can hear, everybody's experience there, Orla's and Shirley's, are very different. And it's also being aware, I suppose, and using that self-discovery piece about yourself, and understanding that your condition is a changeable condition, and constantly monitoring, if you want, your own inner self. I think that's a really important part. So self-discovery is a massive part of living with an illness, and stress is a huge aspect of any chronic illness, but a changeable chronic illness, that gets very heightened. And in particular, even when you talk about grief and you talk about newly diagnosed people, like about 25% of people will actually have symptomology of PTSD when they are newly diagnosed. Now, obviously, it's not an actual diagnosis of PTSD, but it is the symptomology of, and that is really important when you're discussing things like disclosure, because you don't want to go in willy-nilly and just be disclosing to anybody and anyone and then regret having done that. But yes, disclosure, you know, like you say, you went into your bakery and you told him today, but when you're going down the road, maybe like Shirley with the crutch, or if it's a new issue for you, whether it's kind of fatigue, or any kind of a paralysis, or any kind of I've seen people with drooping of their eyes, all of that kind of thing. And it's the questions as well. They can be quite intrusive for a person, because when we are dealing, or when a person is dealing with any kind of a new presentation, there is an element of grief, and there is an element of a new form of acceptance of that piece.
Yeah, and sometimes you just don't want to talk about it. I mean, I use a stick most of the time, and on occasion I'll just use a bit of humor. And someone asks me, "Oh, you hurt your knee?" I tell them, "Yeah, I did it in camogie," and that usually gets me out of the room. Orla, have you had one, say, like very good or very bad, or maybe even just a very blah experience when you've told someone about your MS?
Well, what I didn't say is, like, yes, I'm very open about talking about my diagnosis, but the two very most important people in my life, my kids, I have yet to disclose it to my kids. And probably the only people about, because I talk to everybody. But 8 and 10, they're too young. They can't understand it. So I don't feel that I should burden them with it. They know that mom gets a sore arm, so I suffer from nerve pain on my right arm. Mommy suffers from a sore arm, and she goes into hospital once a month, and they give her medicine in her arm, because I go for monthly infusions. So that's just for my sore arm. They don't know the reason for my sore arm, and I feel like I'm trying to protect them. I might regret not telling them, I don't know, but at the moment, I think I'm going back, because my mom never let her MS affect us growing up. She was lucky that way. Now looking back, I can go, that's why mommy went back to bed on a Sunday. That's why I was with Granny so much during the summer, was because mom might have been having a relapse, and I can see it now because I can understand. But when I was younger, I remember my mom telling us, and we were teenagers at the time when she told us. I was like, oh, mom was MS. Like, yeah, okay. So, and I feel that life is busy and stressful enough that I don't feel I need to burden my kids. They're too young. There's no way. I can barely understand MS some days, let alone my 8 and 10-year-old going to understand it. So I don't feel I should burden them with that. And if I tell them, they'll go, okay, that's what Granny has. Is Mommy going to be like Granny? Is she going to be in a wheelchair like my Granny? And that's what they're automatically going to start thinking, and that's automatically going to be a worry for them. So they're the only two people that I haven't disclosed it to, and I feel at the moment it's the right thing to do, and I can get away with not telling them and protecting them from it because I have such a good support system in place. If I'm having a really bad day, my husband will help out, or they'll go for sleepovers with their grannies and my in-laws and brother-in-laws and sisters.
Well, when it comes time, maybe you could borrow Shirley's book.
It sounds brilliant. So that's it's something like that. It was a nice idea, but yeah. I just at the moment I think I'm doing the right thing for my kids.
And Shirley, have you had any very good or very bad, or just sort of a non-experience?
I sort of had a mix. So when I had told my kids, I found I was protecting a lot of people as well. I was protecting my parents. I think they were from a generation where something like MS, they were going to see the wheelchair, it was their experience with people having diagnosed with MS probably was in a generation that was maybe a little bit different, or maybe the treatment wasn't as advanced. So I was protecting them. And I was protecting lots of people. And then when my kids were okay and my kids were, they were fine with it and they understood, I went and I told my parents. And I there was, I had to be very positive, overly positive, and sometimes I suppose you want to just, be real, and you want to maybe have a tear and get a hug. But I felt, in that situation, I was protecting them. I was assuring them it was fine. I was okay. And after that, and I got over that part of it, I went into my office. And clearly, when I took some time out of the office and we talked a little bit about disclosure in the workplace, and when I was first diagnosed and I was like Orla, you would not have known I had MS. Everything was fine. I wasn't using a crutch, but I did go to my HR manager and I did disclose it because like that, I wanted to take some time off. I wanted to maybe take a little bit of a career break or something like that. So I wanted to have that option there if I needed to take time off or whatever. I wanted the understanding. And that was a great experience. And then I didn't tell anybody else and I got on with life until I could no longer walk unaided. So when I went into the office, when I took time off, a lot of people in the office, a lot of my colleagues had to hold the fort for me. They sort of had to cover my role and were happy to do it. But I almost felt I owed them some disclosure. I needed to be upfront and honest with them about what was going on because I had extended my time off the office a little bit as well. So when I did that, I called them all off individually. I called every one of them and I told them what was going on. And I had such a mixed reaction. Some had experience in family members and they were very supportive and they were very encouraging and they were like, God, you look great and, fair play to you and you're doing well and you're still working and we're delighted to see you back, and been involved. And then I had some work colleagues and friends who I didn't really hear from again. They just they weren't quite sure how to react, or they didn't really understand what I was going through, or made an assumption that I was in, a bad place. But I had really, by the time I had disclosed it, I had lost the ego. I had accepted it. And, I was in a good place with it. I felt I was strong enough to sort of disclose and be honest and upfront and talk to people about it and assure them that, some days are good, some days are bad. And hey, I'm doing okay. So it was a mix, and it took a while for those people that kind of pulled back a little bit and weren't really sure how to react. It took some time for me to just show them I was still me. I still had the same personality. We still had the same banter and fun. And it gradually, they sort of accepted that, okay, it's fine. She's not rocking a chair.
Very kind of them to finally accept your disease.
Yeah.
There's one final question coming across, and it's a very long one, but I'll try to get to the crux of it. And it's basically saying that they were going for some salary protection that they were entitled to because of their union, And then questions started to come up about health, etc. And it started to get very tense. And they were worried that they were about to sign something that they felt like they were lying because they didn't disclose their MS, etc. So they didn't sign it. Is there any time that we have to be careful about what we do say and don't say? I mean, obviously, if we're signing up for insurance or something like that, but in this case, the person just walked away and pretended they didn't have MS.
I think from a financial point of view, if you're signing up, that you would have to disclose in confidence if you're going for insurance like that. Is that what I'm reading here? I'm understanding.
Yeah, I mean, it's a salary protection insurance. It's probably, my guess is it's something like a short-term or long-term disability kind of insurance.
Yeah, I think that you would have to make a disclosure there because that is in insurance. So there's a lot of questions I've seen have come in here. So maybe I might just call out some resources for people if they wanted to ask some questions, because some people have said that if they've been in their job for many years and now they're not able to fulfill the roles. If they wanted any more information, Citizens Advice is a very good place to read up on. Then there's free legal aid. There's a code of practice as well there for people to read about the Disability Act of Employment in Ireland. And then I would also, you can reach out to the WRC if you do have a complaint, and they will guide you to it. And they've got a free call number as well on their website.
All right, and Ruth, I'm going to give you 30 seconds for a final thought as well. We're coming right up on the end here, but one final thought from you.
Final thought would be always consider yourself. And I would strongly advise people to touch base, if not with a mental health professional, if they are struggling with their mental health, but to develop skills and strategies and good self-compassion when dealing with illness.
All right, thank you. You've all answered so many important questions, and there's so many more to ask, I'm sure. I'd encourage everyone who needs more information to visit the links that we provided. Take a look at what Terry Sue had talked about. Get in touch with your local community workers from MS Ireland. I want to extend my greatest thanks to Orla, to Shirley, to Ruth, and Terry Sue. We'll be back again on the last Thursday of November. That would be the 30th, I believe, for our next program. It'll be the final one of the year. I'm calling it Christmas on the Island of Misfit Toys. We'll talk about some of the particular difficulties the Christmas season can bring upon people with MS. And we do hope that you'll put that in your diary and join us on the night. Also, this program should be up on the MS Ireland YouTube channel in about 24 hours or so. And so feel free to share that with anyone in your MS circle with whom you might think it could come in handy. In the meantime, if you have any suggestions for Unspeakable Bits topics, please drop those into us and we'll see what we can do. Until then, I'm Travis L. Gleason, wishing you and your family the best of health. Cheers, and back to you, Fergal.
Well, you've said everything that I needed to say. So just the final thing, it was a lovely talk. We'll definitely have to come back to this topic because there was so many questions coming in there. I really want to thank everyone, Orla Marin particularly, because I got your name wrong at the start. Don't know how I managed to do that. Terry Sue, thank you so much. Shirley, thank you. And Ruth, and of course, Travis. And I look forward to seeing everyone again on the 30th of November with Santa hats on. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.